Welcome to one and all from Toronto, Canada. My name is David Hasketh. I've studied what I call, I don't like to say I am a neuroscientist because that's defining what I am. I am a lifelong student of neuroscience, education, and personal development. And so that's the way I'm going to frame this. We've got a miniature participant here.
Hello.
Uh, all right. Today, I want to spend some time on something that I think all of us as entrepreneurs have struggled with in many ways, not just in our entrepreneurial life, but I think in life in general, and that is stress. And stress shows up in many forms. We'll talk a little bit about that. My journey to stress was perhaps more of an academic one to begin with, but then I really began to wake up as to how stress was impacting my life, and I needed to understand how to be able to minimize that or marginalize that, or to, I don't even want to say stress management because it's not about management. The kind of stress that we're experiencing now in our modern world is not normal. We've normalized stress, and I think that what we can do is that when we understand what it is, how it operates, and we can use tools to actually then put stress in its place. Because stress is, when I say that putting it in its place, is that we need to understand that stress is a form of energy and it consumes energy. It consumes energy that can be otherwise put into our lives in different ways that actually then are optimizing our life, optimizing our efficiency and performance, for lack of better word, but allow us to enter into a dynamic and flow that life is asking of us right now, if I was to speak about this, particularly in the quantum field of things. So that's been some of my experience. And maybe, Carlos, you could share a little bit about what your experience with stress has been, because certainly it's not something that's just entrepreneurial in nature. It's something that affects all of us that we've grown up with. We've experienced stress in different ways. So maybe you could share a little bit of what your pathway through this to pathway through stresses or experiences.
Thank you, David. And really, I will implement the statement you said that it's we're living in a world where stress is created as some sort of a honorable achievement in life, of hustle every day, and not having a guilt for having rest, and similar factors that plays a huge role in this accumulation of stress. What is in my belief is the biggest thing that contributes to people's lives, and that makes it way harder. So and looking from the perspective of how I perceive stress, I could say there are three main elements that bring the much of understanding for me. So the one was that if you're not accepting yourself, you will always have a reason for what to stress about. The second one would be that if you're incapable or you're not practicing self-forgiveness, you have I would say a damaged learning curve. So you don't give yourself enough space, room, time to kind of improve in your relation with stress, and how you navigate through challenges and through life situations. And the third one, I would say, is underappreciation or a lack of gratitude. So, we get things that are not going according to the plan. We get things out of the alignment, or whatever is our explanation to, have this stressful manner. So these three things, is acceptance, forgiveness, and gratitude. Lack of these things, it creates a very amazing soil and environment for stress to multiply and influence us, our work, our relationships, our families, and our world. That's how I did found it in my life, and that's how I learned to kind of handle it with precise care.
So yeah, thank you. I'm interested in your description because you talk about the soil through which then stress can grow. And one of the things that I want to present to people today is really talk about exactly that. Is what is the soil? What are the seeds for stress in the human being? Because it's a universal human condition. And one of the ways to be able to understand this, and I think it's vital in terms of if you really want to move beyond the world of stress and into a world of flow and being able to like you say, it's this the element of forgiveness and acceptance and understanding where you are in your pathway, whether it's as an entrepreneur or as in life in general. But I think for me, one of the things that is most helpful is to understand this. And so that has been really my path and being able to share that with people over the past, 30 years or so, is to really understand how it is that this is not only the way that this works is a source and the seeds are planted in the brain, but it also then provides the ability then to make the kinds of choices that we are able to transcend that or transform it into a new consciousness, into a new awareness that is going to allow us to be able to succeed in how we envisage that success to be in this life. So I'm going to go into a screen share mode. This is the thing that we all have in common from a biological point of view. We all possess this incredible computer that 3 pounds or 1.4 kilograms that exists between our ears, and that has this incredible capacity for processing all the information that comes into us on a second by second basis, processing the important parts of that information and giving us output. So, really, this input processing output model that we give to our computers and our phones and whatnot are really a picture of, they're taken from the way that the human brain works. Our sensory information is our input, our brain processes that information, and the importance of that information, we've got this fantastic filtering mechanism that is down at the very base of the brain. And this is called the brainstem. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But in that area, there's a filtering system that allows you to be able to filter out what is important, what is not important, on a second by second basis, because we're literally being bombarded with millions of bits of sensory information per second. So, how does this relate to stress? Well, stress is a direct experience of the human being. Let's start there. What is stress? Stress is a coordinated response of the body to a perceived threat that prepares the entire body system for fight or flight, or sometimes added as freeze. So I want you just to think about this for a moment, is that in particular, it's related to a perception of threat. Okay. So someone may perceive something as a threat that somebody else doesn't. I often refer to, you can think of animals, for example. You may be afraid of dogs, for example, because so there may be a fear that I had this lady out the front who actually absolutely panicked when there was a dog that was out on our driveway of a neighbor of ours, and the dog was being very friendly, but she had this perception that it was attacking her. So we have this information system that goes through the filter of what's called the reticular activating system in the brainstem that filters out information that is important. And that may be information that, is related to things we need to know and understand, or it may be, from a point of view of positive interaction or negative interaction, as in the case of a dog or a cat or a spider or a lion or a situation that, where you're driving in the car, that kind of thing. So there's this filtering mechanism. And that launches the body into this thing that we call fight or flight or freezing. Now, from a brain point of view, if we take a look at this cross section, this is a cross section view of the brain. In this part here, down here where you can see the cursor, this is what is referred to as the spinal cord, and it joins the brain at the base of the brain case, okay, or the cranium or the skull. And the first port of call where the spinal cord connects to the brainstem is the area that is this filtering mechanism, where this filtering mechanism resides. If something is perceived as a threat, then what happens is it launches a series of signals through its signaling mechanism, because you need to understand that the brain is a kind of it's a wired system, using things that we call neurons and the way neurons are communicate, which is beyond the scope of this conversation. But understanding that the wiring is then the thing that kicks into this region known as the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland then sends out signals through the blood to the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys. And the kidneys are mounted just underneath your rib cage on your upper back, on your lower back, I should say. And that releases things that are known as adrenaline and cortisol. What this does is it activates your entire body and your entire body system into this fight or flight mode or freeze mode. And the consequence of that is that you're ready to run or fight, or in some cases freeze, because maybe that's the best thing to do, is not to bring attention to yourself and just freezing. So you've got these three particular capacities. Now, there are two fundamental types of stress. So first of all, you are encountered with the situation. You've got let's say driving on a car. You've got some kind of a sudden movement that somebody has made. It triggers an avoidance strategy that you need to employ to avoid a motor vehicle accident or whatever. So that is an acute stress, where at a certain point the stress has disappeared and you don't need to worry about it. You can go back to listening to your favorite song on the radio. There's the second type, and that is referred to as the chronic stress. And when we talk about chronic stress, what we mean is that stress that is ongoing. And the chronic stress that is ongoing is where you are in a situation or a perceived situation where you're in ongoing stress. So what happens is your body is in an ongoing stress of producing adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline is that part of you that gives you super strength, and the body systems that are not needed are shut down. And then there's this other component that is called cortisol. Cortisol is actually an anti-inflammatory mechanism that allows the blood and systems and oxygen to be able to be activated in the case of fight or flight. So what happens is that through the process of chronic stress, through the ongoing release of cortisol actually damages brain tissue. It literally kills brain cells. They shrink, they become smaller, and this has really showed up in the last perhaps 20 or 30 years or so, that this is the real impact of how stress impacts the brain and brain function. Thus, the brain doesn't work so well. Okay. So if we talk about now the perception of stress, we find ourselves in an acute situation such as a car needing to take avoiding behaviors to get away from the stress in a short-term situation, but then there are the long-term ones. And these are the types of stress that we find most commonly in human beings. And they are career or work. This is one area that I really focus on, particularly with entrepreneurs and people in business, is in the area around career and work. Okay. We experience all kinds of stress, particularly in the entrepreneurial space. We are carrying the entire responsibility of the business. So whether you are starting out or whether you're in a growth or a scale stage, the three main stages of entrepreneurial growth, you are carrying an enormous amount of responsibility. And that may filter into relationships. It may be business relationships. It may be personal relationships. Uh, I've done a lot of work with students in the past, and there's a huge amount of academic stress that is associated, particularly in relation to high school, but that's pushed down into elementary or primary school, and also into the university and college level stress. One of the big ones that affects most of us is financial stress. We experience an enormous amount of financial stress, health-related stress, particularly associated with injury or chronic illnesses. They can be extraordinarily stressful, and then also spiritual or existential stress. And when I talk about that, I'm really not referring to a religion. I'm talking really about the essence of being human, and that we all have a spiritual nature that is associated with our human beingness, and that we typically have people have questions around that. They're challenged with that and challenged with their association, their relationship to the power of the invisible that plays into our world. All right. So I want to do a visualization experiment to highlight some of what I'm talking about. And so this visualization experiment is as follows. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to sit in your chair or wherever you are, and your feet flat on the ground. And Vaiva, if you're still working on your treadmill, it might be a little bit more difficult to do because I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, but you don't necessarily have to. You can use your visualization apparatus even with your eyes open. That is something we become quite good at. And as you close your eyes, I want you just to relax and take a nice deep breath in and close your eyes. And I'm going to say a series of words, and I want you just to notice the images or the pictures that comes up in your brain. House, tree, dog, phone. Okay. Now, when you do this experiment, you can open your eyes. Is when you do this experiment, typically what you will notice is you will notice that a picture of a house and a tree and a dog and a phone will come up in your mind, and you'll have your own unique mental picture of that and what that looks like. So the second part of the experiment, I'm just going to alter it a little bit. So the first thing is to understand is that, first of all, we have this mental picturing function, this imagination or this picture making function that we have in our brain. The second part is the following, is that I'd like you to close your eyes again, okay, and visualize the following, because I'm going to alter it just slightly and notice what happens to the picture. Brick house, tall tree, little dog, phone call. Open your eyes. Okay. So there's a couple of important pieces here. Is first of all, you will notice that you will have your own images. And as soon as you add a word to it, like a brick house or a tall tree or a phone call, then immediately the image changes to adapt to the meaning that you attach to those words. And the visual images are linked to that. So here's the piece. The piece is that human beings think in pictures. And this is the faculty that permits the rewiring of one's brain because we can choose our input. Most of us are not working at a conscious level where we are choosing the things that we're putting in. So therefore, what's happening is we are running on a system of input that has been already given to us. And I want to show you how this works in particular. So what you visualize becomes your thinking, and your thinking generates the decisions which leads to your actions and results. So when we visualize something, and this is part of the visualization process, is that that decision becomes activated in the body because it comes from the brain, goes through the central nervous system, through the spinal cord, and out into the body, and then you act based on that decision. Does that make sense? This behavior and actions is just behavior and actions based on that decision. The result is not something you can necessarily control, right? The result is the result. So sometimes it has positive consequences, sometimes it doesn't. Yeah. So in terms of the way you interpret positive and negative. So again, we go back to our notion of perception. So what you think, what you visualize becomes your decisions and are the basis for your decisions, and those decisions will lead to your actions and therefore to your results. So how does this happen? So let's go back to the human brain. So I just want to help you with the orientation before I move into the discussion about developmental concentration. So here we have the human brain, the cutaway human brain. Spinal cord is here. This is the brainstem. The pink part is called the limbic system. I'll explain that. And it acts like kind of a shell that goes around the brainstem. So you can think about these as layers that expand outwards. The upper part is called the cerebral cortex or cerebrum. What you're looking at is you're looking at a cutaway view. So you are looking down the middle. There are two hemispheres that kind of form in the way that if you put your two hands together in the way that you might be able to see on the video, those two hands actually, it's kind of the hemispheres and it's split down the center. So what you're looking at is you're looking at the right side because this blue area is the front part, the area that's in behind your forehead. All right. So what I want to touch on here is this whole relationship of the areas of developmental concentration. So the brainstem, the limbic system, and the right and left cortex, or the cerebrum, as they're referred to, develop at certain times through the process of our own development. So the brainstem, which is all associated with autonomic and survival-based function, we're arriving in our body, we're learning how it works, we're taking a hold of it. In that first year, we're learning we have to eat, we have to poop, we learn to cry, we learn to smile. We start to make associations with our families. And that is really associated. The most important thing has to do with survival in that first year. So the breathing, the heart rate, the blood pressure, all of those things that are associated with our automatic functioning of the brain are developing. And that's really in the first year of life. At about the time, somewhere around where we stand up and start walking, this is a transition time from the brainstem into the limbic system, which is this colored area, all these nice little pretty colored network kind of looking things, or parts that are colored in on the diagram. The limbic system is associated with the development of emotions, learning, and memory. It is key, and this is particularly important because if you observe a young child or in our early development, it really is associated with the development of our emotions and how we interact and learn in the world. And so the learning and memory component is associated with this pink area towards the back. It's called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is the area where learning is consolidated and then stored as memory in various parts of the brain, the networks that are already developing in the brain. The third and fourth area have to do with where the thinking starts to really develop. The right side is associated with spatial thinking, so big picture thinking, and it occurs between ages 7 to 11. And the left is associated with logic, so the detailed brain between 12 and 16 years. So just to give you a picture of what this looks like, is the right side is associated with big picture. So this is the front here where the cursor is, and the back is the so big pictures, and then it's associated with the stories, shapes, patterns, imagination, beauty, possibilities is really associated with this. The left hemisphere is associated with detail. So this is where our detailed thinking comes in and develops really in those 12 to 17. Logic, the verbal senses, names, strategy, math, order, and writing. Now, I want to point out here is not to make the mistake of thinking that this is the only time that these develop. Of course, it's a progressive development. But what we've discovered is that there are periods in our life where the concentration of this development is most active. So, for example, we know in the first 7 years that language acquisition is really at its most flexible, most fluid. Children can learn multiple languages, interpret multiple meanings, understand different subtleties of meaning at a very early age without getting confused. And this has to do very much with the learning and memory component. So, but it's not that it's the only time, because even at my age, I can go out and I can learn a language and practice it and become good at it. The piece that is most important about that very feature is the fact that the brain is in a constant state of change, or what we call in neuroscience, we call this neuroplasticity. So we can rewire the brain, add new wiring, get rid of old wiring that's not serving us. And that is one of the key pieces that is associated with stress. Let's move to now the frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex, which is the area in behind your forehead. And this is called this is the executive function, the area that develops, if you will, the ability to be able to take a step back, look, observe, make decisions based on observations, based on analysis, based on our judgments and our discernments and whatnot in the context of our perception of our environment. So it is the one that, if you will, one of the easiest ways to think about this is that it is the piece that is regulating our behavior. So in socially appropriate situations. So you will find that there are different situations into which then you can find that you're going to change your behaviors, and it's regulated in a different way. If you go to a formal situation with a suit and tie and whatnot, is going to be different if you're going out to the park with a bunch of friends to play a game of cricket or baseball or something like that. Soccer, football, right? Or playing music, right? So all of that is going to be regulated based on the perception or the awareness of a particular situation, and that is what's one of the main roles of the frontal cortex. One of the things that you will recognize is that between ages 0 to 6 or 7, or even a little bit later, is that we're really not very conscious of that period of our lives. If you stop for a moment, and let's do another little experiment, I want you to stop and think for a moment about your earliest memory. About what age would that be? So, first of all, I'd like to speculate, because I've done this experiment hundreds of times before with people in my seminars and my coaching, is that number one is, first of all, it's a picture. You'll notice that you'll notice that it's a mental picture or a mental construction, if you will. Number two, I want you to notice that it's like a snapshot. It's not like it's sort of like a moment in time that's captured, like a photograph. And it's probably somewhere around 3, 4, maybe a little bit earlier, unlikely, but a little bit later, it might be, say, even 5 or 6. It really depends. There's no sort of set period. But this indicates what's going on at this time in our development is largely unconscious. So we are learning through our environment and what our environment is telling us. Where that changes, it changes somewhere around 9 years old. It could be a little bit earlier, it could be a little bit later, when we start to think of things more as what I refer to as movie memory, where you start to think in moving pictures. You remember events, you remember things that happened. And that is more of a movie memory thing that happens. And that's indicates a shift in consciousness. And that shift in consciousness is really moving from the subconscious into the self-consciousness. So in this early stages, we are functioning on the unconscious very clearly in our first year of life. I don't know anybody that remembers anything from their first year of life. I think I've had one or two that kind of perceive that they may remember something, but that's typically associated with a traumatic event. Subconscious sort of bits and pieces, sort of straggling photographic memories. But as we move into our awareness, our consciousness, our conscious development, is that moves into self-conscious and conscious awareness, where we now are really waking up to ourself as a participant in the world. We're making decisions. We understand that our decisions have consequences, and that we're learning how to interact in our world in a awakened fashion. I hope all this makes sense at this point. Any questions at this point, Carolus? No hands up?
No hands up, but we having memories from very early age.
Great. And as I say, there's no formula for this. We don't have you should remember something here, you should some. It's all sort of in the flexibility within the consciousness and the experience of the individual human being. So we can't get stuck into these rigid timelines that we typically get caught into. The piece that I really want to point out here has to do with how we make decisions. So decisions typically that are made from a biological reflexive thing, this fight or flight component, or from our emotional cortex, our emotional feelings region, the limbic system in the subconscious, are typically reactive. And those reactive decisions are spontaneous. They're not something that you think through. It's just something that you move right directly in. So we react. So the activity then is moving out of a very spontaneous kind of response. That's been important from a survival point of view. But what happens is that when we get back to the notion of perception of stress in our lives, in our 2024 timeline, there's very little of the fight or flight component that we're really confronted with. So now then becomes a question of, well, how are we making decisions based on our subconscious life? When we become more self-conscious, they're moving into decision making that is associated with operational decisions. So something that is functional, that I want to get from here to here. So it's understanding the laws of cause and effect. And then the strategic, which is really a function of left hemisphere, the left cortex, The strategic is now moving into, oh, I understand and conceptualize the future and how the future then can be formed by the decisions that I make now. So this is why, for example, you can understand that there are only certain things that from a framework, from a societal framework, that we can engage with at later ages, because we don't have those capacities to understand what the consequences for our behavior are until much later in our brain developmental life. When we get into stage 5, into the 5th area, into the prefrontal cortex, this is really where we are making our observations, and we are starting to integrate our consciousness through a process of analysis and understanding, through an integrated way of thinking, of understanding all of those bits and pieces. So that's the decision-making brain. Now, the image of mental function that I'd like to share with you is this, is that again, we go back to this notion of the brain and how the brain makes decisions. So in the first first ages of our life, we're making decisions based on the subconscious brain and the autonomic brain, the unconscious brain. So this is approximately 9 years of age. We're making decisions with our emotions based on the information and the learning and memory that we have, and on the brainstem, the automatic or the autonomic processes that are associated with survival function. Now, the next piece is that after 9, it's the right and left hemisphere and the prefrontal cortex, as described, where we are now making those decisions. Here's the challenge. The challenge is the subconscious brain is the part of the brain that has been programmed, if you will, or the paradigm, or all of our thinking, all of our beliefs, all of our experiences have been bundled into this context that we understand, that serves as the platform for the conscious decisions that we're making. So if you have a fear of dogs, if you have issues around money, and you have observed that your parents had a scarcity around money, if you have experienced bullying as a child, if you have had traumatic experiences as this pre-9-year-old or those early childhood pieces, those things are developed into your beliefs about the world, and those beliefs about the world are then informing what your thoughts are. So what's happening is that we can have a conversation around where your thoughts come from, but those thoughts seem to come from nowhere. If you're sitting there and say you're trying to meditate or trying to concentrate on something, and then all of a sudden you have this thought that's popping up, then what happens is, where does that come from? That comes from the learning structures that are from early in your life. And so that then becomes your framework, your belief framework, your thinking framework that informs how you make your decisions. And that thinking, which is happening up in here in the upper part of the brain, passes through the emotional part of the brain. You attach your emotions to that, and then you respond in the way that I described. It delivers that message out to the body, and then your actions and your behaviors are in alignment with that belief and thinking, those beliefs and thinking, which then gives you the results. And the results, what will happen is that thinking the results will then reinforce your belief in your thinking. It's a sort of a loop that goes around. So the way that we need to address this is really by understanding, what are those beliefs? What are those beliefs that we actually took on board as a young child? Beliefs that we took on, those perceptions, those experiences that we built into this belief structure as a young child. And how do we actually then rewire the brain? And through that process that I referred to earlier as the neuroplasticity of the brain that can build new wiring, build new context and new understanding. So how do we go from limiting beliefs or false beliefs into a new belief structure? And part of that is practice, but there are some pieces that are included in that. And that is some of the things that Carolus was talking about at the very beginning, has to do with forgiveness and forgiveness of self, forgiveness of others, because we hold on to that. That's part of our past structures that we're holding on to. And then acceptance, right? And then building into the future using some of the visualization processes that we have available to be able to create new structures so that we're actually then able to live into a new belief structure that we are continually and on and building in an ongoing way. So I've spent a lot of time a lot more time than I kind of expected to talk about this, but it's been, I hope it's been useful. And let's see now if we have some questions about some questions that might be around this. Carolus, why don't you launch us into this?
Welcome back, David. Welcome back, Carolus. So one of the questions it was from Valentinas, and the question was that he has, to be honest, I have the same question. So he has a memory which is from very early age, and he believes that it's the time when he first time opened his eyes. He specifically remembers parts of the room and you know, such detail to a degree where, you know, he can like realize that and consciously be aware of it. Well, from his question, that sounds like a doubt that is it his brain making it, like making it up, or it's really a memory?
It really depends on, you know, let me just sort of elucidate on some spiritual teachings that I'm familiar with. I'm not, you know, I'm always in a sort of an experimental, you know, understand what's true and what's not. But let's put that into context. The context is that the idea is that we are coming as an aspect of consciousness and occupying a physical body. And what many spiritual teachings, particularly in the East, but some now more in the West, are ascribing to is that there's a period where you are making a conscious choice to come and occupy your body. And that there's a whole process of choice that's associated with that. So you are arriving then at, you're arriving and you've made that choice and you go through a process of forgetting. And there may be just a window when you arrive that you're conscious, that you're still connected to consciousness. In fact, much of what you experience in terms of the early stages of development and the kind of out of the mouth of babes comes great wisdom is this connection to that greater quantum field or source of consciousness or greater intelligence or God or whatever it is, whatever that higher power is that you may ascribe to, that there is something of a memory associated with that. So to say yes or no, the only way that I would be able to suggest that it is one way or another is by inquiring through those people that may have been present. What did it look like, and does that fit with the experience?
We have a question from Robert, and his
I see.
question is, yeah, how
I
you
don't see it
rewire your
all.
brain. Yeah, so how you rewire your brain. I have bad experience in very early childhood.
How do you rewire that brain? Your
The
brain from
brain.
that? Or
Mhm.
first of all, it's not a quick fix. I want to say that because what it is it's associated with perceptions and your emotional reality. So one of the things is to be you need to stop and understand, well, what is the direct experience? What is the experience of that memory? And then processing that so that then you can start to say, okay, is this what is the belief that I have associated with that wiring? and what is the new belief that I want to bring into play, and then to be able to reconstruct it based on what it is and what you perceive it is, and then understand that there's a process whereby you can start to create a new belief or a new structure based on that, because typically what happens is those perceptions are we've built a false framework around that. And let me expand on that. And I do acknowledge that there is going to be it's going to be individual. So it's not one size fits all, that the answers are difficult to elucidate without having going into a deeper conversation with the individual. But be that as it may, there is typically, with the wiring that we have, is generates what I refer to as a false belief or a limiting belief, as some refer to it. Now, why is that? Because in those early stages, you don't have an experience to refer to. You refer to that through your emotions and the emotions that you've experienced from outside of yourself. So if you have parents or brother or sister or family members or community members that respond in negative ways, and that is a tendency towards in our societies, really responding through fear and stress and anxiety. This is something that's been passed on to us for generations. This is not something new. It's just that we've got the tools now to make us more stressed. But what happens is that framework becomes built in because you don't have the ability to discern for yourself. Everything that you learn, you believe to be true because that is your nature. That is our nature as young children. So we build that in to what our belief structure is. We don't have the ability to discern. We trust in our world around us. So that then becomes incorporated into our wiring. Now, what we need to do is we need to unpack what that wiring is and the meaning that we gave to that wiring. And that's where we go back to the visualization exercise. Everything that we do, the picture that we have, we associate with a meaning. As soon as we ascribe a meaning to it, then we end up with a belief. When we have that belief then informs our decisions and our thinking, or our thinking and then our decisions, which is linked in. If you can sort of trace that back, it's all linked into the emotions. So this whole complex is now into that. So how do we then, so the process then becomes, now, how do I, or not how do I, but to really move into creating a meaning or a non-meaning to that particular event. And that is a process. That's a process of practice, because over the years that you and I have been on the planet and inhabiting this body, using this brain, what we've done is we've practiced that very, very well. So what happens is it becomes more and more, the wiring becomes more and more structured, and then or firm. But the fact of the matter is that through a process of understanding that, we can then move into a rewiring and a conscious choice, a choosing to make something different of it. Does that make sense?
For me, it does, and if it doesn't make sense to anyone in the listen who listens, they always can ask questions. That's why we're here. Before going to a second question, another question that Justina just posted, I would like to a little bit add from my own perspective and
Please.
and from my own experience on that side. So I spent last 8 years on this game of rewiring and changing that understanding of experience. And one of the things, that I made some notes on a presentation David did, and really it perfectly aligns with the question and allows me to go through a couple of them. So one of the things is you have to become very, very humble to accept that there is a potential for a false reality in your head. And we become so concrete with our own beliefs because they support the infrastructures that are created from early age, especially the age from 0 to 7. It's where where the most survival needed parts of the brain form, and you get stuck in specific ways of experiencing emotion. So, for example, if you're not open for a flexible option of the input, so you receive a situation and there is only this way, so there's only that specific outcome that can be from this input in you, then you kind of just like you're doing that loop. Now if you become open to that, you can start doing that visual shift where you kind of see the situation, you're like, that might be different than I thought it was before. Now that's where the change starts to happen, which requires consistent implementation and habit building in your internal thinking and analytical process. Now, if you've been, for example, as a child, you've been silenced. So your parents wasn't emotionally mature, and they couldn't process their own emotions, and your emotions being triggered to their own emotions. So they had to shut you down because you are triggering basically their archetypes of what their beliefs are. They're triggering their nervous system. They are not feeling good about that, and their brain has to eliminate that. So it comes to the point where your all experience is based on the bias of someone. So someone being traumatized in life, they've been growing up with a different cultural conditioning, and that now been given to you, and that has, I would say, a polars, like so you can have a negative charge in the experience and you can have a positive charge, and that's how I call it a neutralization. So if you become humble enough and open enough for yourself to kind of, might be that you misunderstood at that time. You didn't have tools, like David explained. You didn't have tools to understand that situation in a specific way that you can now. So if you are open and humble enough to kind of take that negative charge and see that there is a potential opposite side of that story, and there is, for example, if you've been suppressed, if you've been silenced, there is a chance that over the life you had many opportunities to learn to speak up. So someone who been suppressed, they have the biggest sense of a difference between having a voice and not having a voice. Someone who had voice all his life, they have no such experience in deep senses, I mean, of what means having no voice. And when you're growing up from there where you have no voice and you start to build that voice up and you get that clarity on, that gives a gift. That's one of the things that I learned from Dr. Zsuzsanna Fajczak, that our fears, our pain from the past is a wrapped gift, and that's our conscious decision to unwrap it. Now, Justina asked the question. It seems like we live only in memories. Is that correct? So before going to giving that mic to you, David, I just want to step into my third point. That's also in relation to the wall presentation. So it's not just about the memory. So imagine it's like a projector. That's how I see it, and it's really, I'm using this to explain for a 6-year-old. Yeah, so all this experience you had is a starting point of a projector, and now you get a situation you want to see, and you open up. And what is opening up? What is the source of that opening up? So that's your projection. That's the memories that are integrated. It's emotional imprints. That's the data in a software, let's say. Yeah. And we can become addicted to stress. So stress becomes as a language of love. So you become that person that I don't know how to love without the conflict. Then you start to look for a conflict, because after a conflict, what follows? A forgiveness, a time together. All these words of forgiveness and appreciation and understanding, and maybe gifts, maybe time together, maybe let's go out, let's have a coffee in the evening, darling, because you had a conflict. So that's a coping mechanism, and that support. So first point is being open. So I don't see that we operate from a memory, because memory really is one of the things, like the question Valentina's had was, is do I have a memory or my brain is making it? My mother told me a story that when I was 1.5 years old, I was helping her with dishes. So she was washing dishes, and I was taking the washed dish and I was taking it to the room, to the cupboard. Now, she told me that that was in particularly a very important event in my life, where I started to learn to feel bad about helping. So there was, a specific part of my development in when I was 24 years old. I found that out. So, and she told me that story, and until the day she told me, I never had a memory of it. And when she told me that story, I even remember the shade of light in the kitchen. What was that at that time? And I even remember how I fall, because I still have a scar on my finger of breaking that, and that was like, and that was holding attention for a long time. So how that is that a memory, or my brain is just picking up things and creating what suits the agenda? So that's question, and my passing to you, David.
Well, I think there's a couple of real juicy bits that you've left more than tangling there for me to hook onto there, Carlos. I think the first thing is that we need to understand that the brain is a meaning-making machine. So we are trying to make sense of our world all the time. So that's number one. Number two, memory is useful from the standpoint of learning particular skills, learning where one's boundaries start and where another's begins. So there's a whole really important component to memory. But what happens is that what are we holding on to in terms of memory and what we think memory is? And the reason I say this is as follows. When you start to take a look at the way that the brain works through a series of wired connections between neurons, and neurons are the word for nerve cells. And those nerve cells are not connected. So if you can see my fingertips, there's a slight gap that exists between them. And that's where these things that you will have heard of, dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, different neurotransmitters are communicating information as a result of an impulse coming down to the end and spilling out and touching the next one and carrying on the impulse. So that process of wiring is kind of like a electrochemical impulse. There's a chemical transmission of that information from one to the other neuron that perpetuates that. And all of this cycles around in split seconds that then ends up being this thing that we call perception. How is it that I can visualize? How is it that I can have a thought, emotions, and whatnot if it's all electrochemical communication? Because there's no picture up here, but I can create one, right? There's no emotion, place for emotion, but I experience that. I experience thoughts, I experience decisions, I experience light, dark, temperature. I feel my body. I have an experience of my body. What is that? So when we talk about this notion of perception, perception is something that is moving. Now, what we're starting to understand from a quantum field point of view is that it is an expression of energy. And that what we are, our body, our memories, our lives are an expression of energy in a certain dimension or a three-dimensional field or in the time-space field, rather than being something specific that and those memories are important, I should say, going back to that, but it is very much associated with perception. So given that that's the case, what we need, and the other piece that I want to mention here is that it's important to understand that what we are talking about is that we are talking about being able to, when we talk about perception, if we can step out of perception and into observation and taking that step back and becoming aware of our ability to observe, that is one of the first and foremost steps to be able to understand and to be able to harness those limiting beliefs, those false beliefs, those structures that we've got in our brain to rewire. And so it becomes part of it then, if I was to say, and I go back to, I think it was Robert that was asking the question about that. One of the key strategies is you can use that to become aware of your thoughts and through observation, and aware of your world through a process of observation.
It's like a chessboard model. You remember, David, we discussed before. So you have two players playing chess, and you have one person watching from a side. So it's same applies to any situation that happens in your life. So you can have a first player experience. You can see the game from this side of perspective. You can have a second player experience, whereas you have more options, more strategies, more moves, from a second player perspective that takes into account again both sides. Then you have an observer from a side who's watching two players play, and then we have a fourth perspective, which is the board itself. So an observation, the attachment to observation, an attachment to a certain way it has to go, that's where the conditioning is. So if you can step into the place of board where everything is possible, and you make changes and rewirings according to your best capacity right now, I think you will be doing well.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that, again, moving into this observation, is by being able to observe your thoughts and to have those thoughts that are actually showing up that are negative or having a negative impact in your life. One of the things to be able to do is to be able to shift, if you're in observation mode and you're able to observe that, you're able to shift that from a negative perception into something the opposite, like you referred to as the opposite perception, or a new belief that you're going to generate. Because the old belief is not something you want to hold on to. It's holding you back. It's holding you from being the full potential that you are as a human being. So if you can take that, make the observation, and then and you can literally do this as an exercise. What is a negative or limiting belief that I've got, or a false belief, and what is the opposite of that? Because the opposite is the thing that that's the lesson you were speaking about, particularly with respect to Dr. Zuzana, is the lesson is, what is that showing you? And then when that shows up, okay, that's showing me that, and how do I observe that? And now what is the shift? What is the choice that I'm making into the new belief? And that's not something that happens like that. It's something that requires practice. Again, I go back to the point is that we become very, very well practiced in our negative or false perceptions, false beliefs that we've got structured as part of our childhood learning that has happened from a time when we can't even remember.
David, what do you think if we invite everyone to turn on the camera for a group picture, and then maybe some of them wants to have a direct conversation with you or me, and we just proceed from there for
let's do that.
Time as anyone has, and yeah, done. Amazing. Is anyone would like to have a conversation for some time while David is here? Maybe you got any questions? Okay, if nobody has any questions, as at least I don't see anyone asking, I would like to say thank you, David, for your time, your presentation, and I guess we're gonna be on next week, Wednesday.
We shall, and we'll find a way in. You know what would be great? If things come up from any of you that have been part of this conversation, just drop a question. You can drop a question to me at support@brainfocushealth.com, because it's always important to, there's a process of digesting, and then questions will come up that might be relevant that we can address next week in another meeting, and then maybe we bring in some other elements that would be helpful. So yeah.
Also, David, a little introduction into your book that would be also beneficial, and if anyone would like to read the book, so they can have a sense of the work you do, that would be also great.
Yep, it's Awakening Our Conscious Thinking. It's subtitled "The Brain's Evolution to Learning, Growth, Resilience, and Peace." Inner Peace. And that's a self-published ebook, and it's available from roadmap.brainfocushealth.com. And we'll put that in when I put this onto YouTube. I'll put the links are going to be underneath the video.
I also sent email for any questions, and website if anyone would like to get the book from the website. And yeah.
Terrific. Thank you, one and all. Thank you for joining. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
have a great day forward.
Thank you.
Okay.